I arrived at the Grand Plaza Hotel with my heart full of pride. After 22 years of raising my son Jackson, alone today was his wedding day. I straightened my rented tuxedo and walked into the venue with my head held high. The moment should have been perfect, but as I entered the reception hall, my eyes fell on the nameplate at my assigned table. It read, "Low Educated Fake Dad." The air left my lungs as I heard snickers from the bride family table nearby. I stood there frozen until my fingers traced the insulting words. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. If this story resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe, because what my son did next changed everything about that day. My journey as a single father began when I was just 20 years old. I still remember that rainy Tuesday when Sarah, my girlfriend of 2 years, left our apartment with her bags packed. Our son Jackson was only 3 weeks old at the time. She placed him in my arms, said she was not cut out to be a mother, and walked out the door. I called her name repeatedly, but the only response was the sound of her car engine starting and fading into the distance. There I stood, a community college dropout working at a local warehouse, holding this tiny human who depended entirely on me. That night, as Jackson cried for hours, I made him a promise that I would do everything in my power to give him the best life possible. The years that followed were far from easy. I took on multiple jobs, working days at the warehouse and nights as a security guard. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed. My mother helped with childcare when she could, but her own health issues meant I often brought Jackson to work with me, setting up a small play area in the break room or having him nap in the security office. I had to abandon my dreams of finishing college and becoming an engineer. Every time I considered going back to school, the reality of our financial situation pulled me back. Jackson needed new shoes, dental work, or school supplies. Those needs always came first. Instead of pursuing my education, I learned everything I could from free online resources and library books during lunch breaks and the rare quiet evenings. Despite these challenges, Jackson and I formed an unbreakable bond. We had our Sunday traditions, where we would go fishing at the local lake, then cook our catch together while talking about his week at school. During winter months, we built snow forts and had epic snowball fights that left us both exhausted and laughing. Our apartment was small, but it was filled with love, and the countless art projects, science experiments, and model airplanes we created together. I pushed Jackson to excel academically, knowing that education would give him opportunities I never had. I could not help with advanced math or science homework, but I sat beside him every night, learning alongside him from his textbooks. His teachers often commented on his unusual dedication, not realizing it reflected the values I had instilled in him. By the time Jackson reached high school, he was thriving. He joined the debate team, played baseball, and maintained straight-A grades. I worked overtime for months to buy him a decent laptop when he started taking advanced placement courses. The pride I felt watching him excel was worth every sacrifice I had made. When Jackson received a full scholarship to attend Westridge University, I cried tears of joy. He was the first person in our family to attend college. I helped him move into his dorm, pretending I had something in my eye when we said goodbye. That night, I returned to our empty apartment and looked at the refrigerator, covered with his achievements, knowing he was on his way to a better life than mine. During his sophomore year, Jackson called me with excitement in his voice. He had met someone special, named Amanda. As he described her intelligence, kindness, and beauty, I could hear the love in his voice. I was happy for him, but also nervous. Amanda was from a wealthy family of doctors and lawyers. Her father was a hospital administrator with multiple degrees, and her mother was a successful attorney. 6 months later, Jackson brought Amanda home during spring break. She was polite and seemed genuinely fond of my son. I did my best to make our modest apartment welcoming, cooking my special barbecue ribs and cleaning until everything shined. Amanda complimented the meal and asked thoughtful questions about raising Jackson. She even brought me a thoughtful gift, a fishing lure set showing Jackson had told her about our Sunday tradition. When Jackson announced their engagement a year later, I was thrilled, but concerned. I worried about how I would fit into this new chapter of his life. The difference between our worlds became painfully clear during our first dinner with the Thorntons' Amanda parents. They lived in a mansion in the exclusive Hillcrest neighborhood, with a view overlooking the entire city. Their dining room was larger than my entire apartment. Mr. Thornton, with his perfectly tailored suit and confident demeanor, asked about my career and education within the first 5 minutes of meeting me. The disapproval in his eyes was unmistakable when I explained my work as a warehouse supervisor. Mrs. Thornton smiled tightly and quickly changed the subject to their recent European vacation. Throughout the evening, they spoke about their connections at prestigious universities and country clubs, clearly emphasizing the social circles they inhabited, circles I could never access. Jackson squeezed my shoulder reassuringly as we left that night. He must have sensed my discomfort. In the car ride home, he promised me that Amanda loved him regardless of his background or family wealth. I wanted to believe him, but the seed of worry had been planted. As the wedding date approached, I noticed myself being systematically excluded from planning discussions. Whenever I offered suggestions or asked how I could help Mrs. Thornton would smile condescendingly and say, "The professionals will handle everything, Warren." When I tried to contribute financially offering to pay for the rehearsal dinner as is traditional for the father of the groom, Mr. Thornton dismissed my offer. "We have standards to maintain," he said, not bothering to hide the implication that I could not afford those standards. Jackson became increasingly distant, caught between two worlds. When I called him, our conversations were shorter, and he seemed distracted. Twice he canceled our monthly fishing trip, saying he had wedding appointments with the Thorntons. I swallowed my hurt and told myself this was natural, that he was building a new life. Still, each night I lay awake wondering if I was losing my son to a world that had no place for me. The week before the wedding, I received an email detailing the schedule. I noticed I was not included in the rehearsal dinner. When I called Jackson about this, he sounded uncomfortable. "The Thorntons want to keep it intimate, just immediate family," he explained. The irony of this statement, that somehow I was not considered immediate family to my own son, cut deeper than any insult the Thorntons had directed at me so far. Despite these concerns, I remained determined to support Jackson on his special day. I spent 2 months saving for a good quality tuxedo rental and had my mother's old pocket watch polished to give him as a wedding gift. It had belonged to my grandfather, and while not valuable in monetary terms, it represented our family legacy of hard work and perseverance. I wrapped it carefully, hoping it would remind Jackson of where he came from, even as he moved into his new life. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, sunny but not too hot for an outdoor ceremony. I arrived early at the Grand Plaza, one of the most exclusive hotels in the city, nervous but excited to see my son get married. The venue was more extravagant than anything I had ever seen, up close with crystal chandeliers, marble columns, and fresh flower arrangements taller than me. I felt immediately out of place among the arriving guests in their designer clothes and confident demeanors. My rented tuxedo, while the best I could afford, felt suddenly inadequate compared to the custom attire worn by the other men. I noticed several guests from the bride's side glancing at me with curiosity, or worse, pity. One woman whispered to her companion as I passed, "That must be the groom father. Such a shame about his situation." I pretended not to hear, focusing instead on finding Jackson before the ceremony. When I finally located him in a private room reserved for the groom party, I hardly recognized my son. He wore an expertly tailored tuxedo that must have cost thousands, his hair styled in a way I had never seen before. He looked handsome but somehow different, as if already transformed into a member of the world I could never access. Still, when he saw me, his face lit up with the same smile he had as a boy when I would return home from work. We hugged, and I presented him with the pocket watch. For a moment, I saw emotion well up in his eyes as he recognized it. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly, tucking it carefully into his pocket. Before we could talk further, one of his groomsmen, a college friend I had never met, interrupted to say the photographer wanted pictures of the groom party. Jackson apologized, promised to catch up during the reception, and was whisked away. When it was time for the ceremony to begin, I was directed to my seat by an usher. To my surprise, I found myself in the back row on the groom's side, despite being the father of the groom. I watched as the Thorntons' relatives and friends filled the front rows. Mrs. Thornton, mother, who I had never even met, was seated in the front row while I could barely see over the heads of guests in front of me. The ceremony itself was beautiful, but felt like watching a movie about strangers. Jackson and Amanda exchanged vows under an elaborate floral arch with the city skyline as their backdrop. The officiant spoke about joining two distinguished families, emphasizing the impressive accomplishments of the Thorntons, while making no mention of Jackson's upbringing or my role in his life. I clapped and smiled appropriately, focusing on my son's happiness rather than my growing sense of exclusion. After the ceremony, guests were directed to a ballroom for the reception, while the wedding party took photographs. I wandered around the cocktail hour alone, not knowing anyone well enough to join their conversations. Eventually, I made my way to the reception hall to find my assigned seat for dinner. The ballroom was transformed into something from a fairy tale, with twinkling lights, towering centerpieces, and gold-accented place settings. Each table had an elegant arrangement of name cards. I circled the perimeter searching for my name among the dozens of tables. Finally, at a table far from the head table where Jackson and Amanda would sit, I found it. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words on my nameplate, low-educated fake dad. Not Warren Morris. Not father of the groom. But a cruel, deliberate insult placed where everyone could see it. I picked up the card, turning it over in disbelief, wondering if this was some terrible mistake. A burst of laughter drew my attention to a group of young men watching me from across the room. Amanda, two brothers and their friends. One nudged, the other pointing in my direction. Their smug expressions made it clear this was no accident but an intentional humiliation. My hands shook as I set the nameplate back down, unsure what to do. Making a scene would only embarrass Jackson on his wedding day, but sitting at that table with that nameplate seemed unbearable. As guests began filling the hall, a few noticed the nameplate and either looked away uncomfortably or worse shared amused glances. Heat rose to my face as I stood there exposed and ridiculed. I considered simply slipping out before Jackson would notice my absence. But the thought of abandoning my son on his wedding day, of letting these people win, kept me rooted to the spot. Mrs. Thornton approached her expression, a practiced mask of politeness that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, Warren," she said, surveying me like an unwelcome stain on her perfect event. "I see you found your seat." Her gaze flickered to the nameplate, and her lips twitched with the ghost of a smile before she composed herself. Such a shame about the misprint. Her insincere tone made it clear she considered it no misprint at all. Before I could respond, Mr. Thornton joined us, placing his arm around his wife's shoulders. He barely acknowledged me before launching into conversation about the success of their event. The ceremony was exquisite. Do not you think? Of course, Amanda deserves nothing but the best. We made sure of that despite certain elements we had to work around. His gaze lingered meaningfully on me with those last words. Unable to contain myself any longer, I quietly asked, "Did you approve this?" Pointing to the nameplate. Mr. Thornton's expression hardened. "Warren," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Let us be frank. Jackson is a bright young man who has managed to rise above his unfortunate upbringing. He is joining our family now, and we intend to help him reach his full potential, which means certain ties to his past may need to be, shall we say, minimized." I stared at him in disbelief as he continued. "You are merely biological. Amanda family will provide Jackson with the proper connections and opportunities that a real father would have secured for him. We have already arranged a position for him in my brother law firm, provided he demonstrates appropriate loyalty to the family that can truly advance his future." The calculated cruelty of his words struck me like physical blows. Merely biological, not a real father. After 22 years of sacrificing everything for my son, these people who had known him for less than 3 years presumed to dismiss my role in his life entirely. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as I struggled to maintain my composure. What Mr. Thornton said next nearly broke me. "We expect Jackson will naturally distance himself from certain influences as he acclimates to our world. It would be easier for everyone, especially him, if you would facilitate that transition gracefully. Perhaps limit your visits to major holidays only in the future." In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity what was happening. This was not just about humiliating me at the wedding. The Thorntons were systematically trying to separate Jackson from me permanently, to erase me from his new life. The nameplate was just a physical manifestation of their larger plan, to reduce me to nothing more than a genetic donor, not a father. I looked past Mr. Thornton to where Amanda stood, with her friends occasionally glancing in our direction. Her silent complicity in her family behavior toward me was its own kind of betrayal. I had welcomed her into our small family, believing she loved my son for who he was, including where he came from. Now I wondered if she too saw Jackson as a project to be refined, his background, something to be scrubbed away like a stain. As dinner began, I sat at my assigned table, surrounded by distant acquaintances who clearly had been placed with me as an afterthought. I removed the offensive nameplate, slipping it into my jacket pocket as evidence of what I had endured. Throughout the meal, I pushed food around my plate, unable to eat, as I processed what had transpired. The final indignity came when the toasts began. The MC, following a script clearly provided by the Thorntons, called for speeches from the bride father, the bride mother, the maid of honor, and the best man. There was no mention of the groom father. I had prepared a short speech about watching Jackson grow into the man he had become, about the pride that had sustained me through years of hardship. Now those words would remain unspoken, deemed unworthy by the family that had taken control of my son's life. Mr. Thornton toast was particularly painful to endure. He spoke about welcoming Jackson into a family of achievers and tradition, about how they would guide him toward a proper future. Now we can begin educating Jackson properly, he said with a laugh that was echoed by his side of the room. What came before was just practice, but now his real life can begin. Each word felt like another brick in a wall being built between my son and me. I could not bear it anymore. As applause followed Mr. Thornton's speech, I quietly stood and made my way toward the exit. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give the Thorntons the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I would call Jackson tomorrow, explain my absence, and hope that some part of our relationship could be salvaged. I had nearly reached the door when I heard my name called. Dad, wait. I turned to see Jackson pushing through the crowd of guests, his expression concerned and confused. I quickly wiped my eyes, not wanting him to see how much I was hurting on what should be the happiest day of his life. When he reached me, he put his hand on my shoulder, his eyes searching mine. Where are you going? The reception just started, he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. I forced a smile. I just needed some air, son. I will be back in a minute. I lied, unable to tell him I was actually leaving. Jackson frowned, clearly not believing me. Something is wrong. You have had that look since I saw you at the ceremony. The same one you used to get when the bills piled up, but you did not want me to worry. Tell me what is happening. I hesitated, torn between protecting his special day and being honest about the humiliation I had endured. Before I could decide, Jackson noticed the nameplate partially visible in my pocket. He reached for it before I could stop him, pulling it out and reading the cruel words written there. His face transformed from confusion to shock, then to a cold anger I had rarely seen in my gentle son. What is this? Who did this? He demanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. When I reluctantly explained about the nameplate and my conversation with Mr. Thornton, leaving out some of the most hurtful details to spare him, Jackson's face darkened further. He clenched the nameplate so tightly his knuckles turned white. And you were just going to leave? Without telling me, he asked, sounding hurt. I sighed, placing my hand on his arm. It is your wedding day, Jackson. I did not want to create a scene or put you in the middle of this. The most important thing today is your happiness. Jackson stared at me for a long moment before shaking his head. No, Dad. The most important thing is family. Real family. The kind that sticks by you no matter what. Not the kind that judges your worth by your education or bank account. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Come with me. I felt a flutter of anxiety. Jackson, whatever you are thinking, please do not do anything that will make things difficult between you and Amanda family. They will be part of your life for years to come. So will you, he said firmly. You raised me to stand up for what is right, to never let anyone disrespect the people I love. It is time I showed you I was listening all those years. Before I could protest further, Jackson gently but firmly led me back into the reception hall. The music had stopped, and Mr. Thornton was still at the microphone, now introducing Amanda extended family members. Jackson walked directly to the head table, pulling me along beside him. The room quieted, as guests noticed us approaching conversations, trailing off into curious silence. When we reached the front, Jackson released my arm and extended his hand toward Mr. Thornton. May I? He asked, gesturing to the microphone. His tone was polite, but left no room for refusal. Mr. Thornton hesitated, clearly annoyed at the interruption, but with hundreds of eyes on them, he reluctantly handed over the microphone. We were actually in the middle of something, he said through a forced smile. Jackson nodded. I know, and I apologize for the interruption, but there is something important I need to say. His voice carried clearly through the sound system, drawing the attention of every person in the room. Amanda, now noticing the tension, moved closer to the front, her expression concerned and questioning. Jackson surveyed the room before speaking again. First, I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate with us today. He paused, his eyes finding mine. Especially those who traveled the longest emotional distances to be here. He held up the nameplate for everyone to see. This was placed at my father's seat tonight. He read the words aloud, his voice steady but vibrating with controlled emotion. Low-educated fake dad. Gasps and uncomfortable murmurs swept through the crowd. Amanda covered her mouth in shock, her eyes darting between the nameplate Jackson and her family. Her brothers, who had been smirking moments before, suddenly found their shoelaces fascinating. For those of you who do not know, my father Jackson continued. Let me tell you about this man. He raised me alone from the time I was 3 weeks old, after my mother decided she did not want the responsibility of parenthood. He worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs to make sure I had everything I needed. He sacrificed his own dreams of becoming an engineer so that I could pursue mine. Jackson's voice grew stronger as he spoke, years of pride and gratitude pouring out. When I was 9 and needed emergency surgery for my appendix, he donated blood and stayed by my hospital bed for 3 days straight, still in his work uniform, refusing to leave, even when nurses insisted. When I was 13 and bullied at school, he taught me not how to fight back with my fists, but with my mind and character. I watched in astonishment as my son detailed memories. I had almost forgotten small sacrifices I had made without a second thought, because that is what parents do. My father may not have a college degree, Jackson continued, but he educated me in ways no university ever could. He taught me integrity by showing up every single day, even when he was exhausted. He taught me resourcefulness by fixing our old car 100 times, instead of buying a new one so we could afford my science camp tuition. He taught me love by putting my needs before his own for 22 years without complaint. By now, many guests were wiping away tears. Amanda had moved to Jackson's side, taking his free hand in hers, her expression a mixture of surprise and admiration. Jackson turned directly to Mr. Thornton, his voice level but firm. So when you call him low-educated or a fake dad, you are not just insulting the man who made me who I am today. You are revealing how little you understand about what it means to be a real father. Then he faced me again, his eyes shining. Dad, let us show them what family really means. Would you do me the honor of giving the next toast? The one that should have been yours from the beginning? The room erupted in applause, drowning out whatever protest Mr. Thornton might have made. Amanda stepped forward, taking the microphone briefly. I had no idea about this, she said, her voice breaking. Warren, I am so sorry. This is unacceptable, and I want you to know I had nothing to do with it. She turned to her family, her expression hardening. And I expect those responsible to apologize immediately. Her brothers shifted uncomfortably under her glare while her parents stood rigid with shock and embarrassment. The control they had maintained over the event was slipping away, their carefully crafted narrative crumbling. With trembling hands, I accepted the microphone from Jackson. I had no prepared speech, no carefully written words to mark this occasion. Instead, I spoke from my heart about the joy of raising such an extraordinary young man, about the pride I felt watching him grow into someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I spoke about welcoming Amanda into our family, about how love expands rather than divides. I did not mention the humiliation I had endured, or the hurt it had caused. Instead, I focused on the future, on the family my son was creating today, and my hopes for their happiness. As I finished my toast, raising my glass to the newlyweds, the room once again filled with applause. Jackson embraced me tightly, whispering, "Thank you for everything," in my ear. When he released me, Amanda hugged me as well, tears streaming down her face. I am so ashamed, she whispered. I had no idea they would do something like this. Please believe me. I patted her back gently. We are family now, I told her, and family forgives. The reception continued, but with a notably different atmosphere. Several guests approached me with kind words and conversations, no longer avoiding me as they had earlier. Mr. and Mrs. Thornton maintained their distance, clearly processing their public embarrassment. But Amanda brothers eventually approached, offering stilted apologies that seemed more motivated by their sister insistence than genuine remorse. What mattered most was that my son had stood up for me, had publicly acknowledged the bond between us that no social status or wealth could diminish. In that moment, I knew that regardless of how his life with Amanda unfolded, our connection would remain unbroken. Later, as the dancing began, Jackson found me again. I have something else to tell you, he said, guiding me to a quiet corner. Amanda and I have been talking about our plans after the honeymoon. I nodded, bracing myself for news about moving away or taking the job with her uncle that Mr. Thornton had mentioned. We decided not to take her father offer, Jackson said. I applied for a teaching position at the community college, the same one you attended. They offered me the job last week. I stared at him in surprise. But what about the law firm position? The connections? The opportunity? Jackson smiled, shaking his head. Dad, you taught me that a meaningful life is not about status or connections. It is about doing work that matters with people who matter to you. I want to teach to help students like you, who have the intelligence and drive, but maybe not the advantages others take for granted. He squeezed my shoulder. Besides, the community college is 15 minutes from your apartment. We found a place nearby. You will be over for Sunday dinner every week, no excuses. Emotions swelled in my chest, making it difficult to speak. For the second time that day, tears threatened, but this time from happiness rather than hurt. You sure about this? I finally managed. This is a big decision. Most sure I have ever been, Jackson replied confidently. Amanda agrees completely. She was furious when she heard what her father said to you. She wants distance from their influence for a while. Her exact words were, I fell in love with a Morris man, not a Thornton wannabe. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Well then, I will bring the fishing gear for both of you next Sunday. As I watched my son rejoin his bride on the dance floor, I realized that the nameplate incident, painful as it was, had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened our family bonds. Sometimes it takes an attempt to break something to reveal just how unbreakable it truly is. In the months following the wedding, our lives settled into a new pattern, one I could never have predicted during those dark moments at the reception. True to his word, Jackson and Amanda found an apartment just 20 minutes from mine. They declined the lavish honeymoon the Thorntons had planned to Europe, instead taking a road trip along the coast in my old truck, which Jackson insisted was more meaningful. The Sunday after they returned, they showed up at my door with grocery bags and Amanda family cookbook declaring it was time I learned some new recipes. That afternoon, my small kitchen filled with laughter, as Amanda taught us both how to make her grandmother famous paella. When Jackson burned the rice, she simply shrugged and said, "This is how new traditions start. The imperfect ones are always the most memorable." Our Sunday dinners became a weekly constant. Sometimes we fished in the morning, sometimes we watched football games, but we always made time to connect. Amanda proved herself to be nothing like her parents, embracing our modest lifestyle and finding joy in the simple pleasures I had shared with Jackson throughout his childhood. The relationship with the Thorntons remained strained for several months. They made occasional attempts to lure Jackson and Amanda back into their world, with offers of vacations, connections, and financial assistance. Each time, the young couple politely declined, establishing clear boundaries about respect and family values. I never pushed Jackson to maintain this distance. In fact, I encouraged him to find a path to reconciliation for Amanda's sake. Family is still family. I told him, even when they make terrible mistakes. The anger you feel now will fade, but the regret of a permanent estrangement might not. 6 months after the wedding, a turning point came when Mrs. Thornton showed up at my apartment, unannounced. Standing awkwardly at my door, she looked smaller, somehow less intimidating than she had at the wedding. She asked if we could talk, and though hesitant, I invited her in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Jackson had done his homework for years. She glanced around at the modest surroundings, not with the judgment I expected, but with curiosity. Finally, she spoke. "I owe you an apology, Warren," she said, her voice lacking its usual polish. "What happened at the wedding was inexcusable. I did not create that nameplate, but I knew about it and did nothing to stop it. I have no justification to offer." Her honesty surprised me. I asked her why she had come now, after months of silence. She sighed, suddenly looking tired. "Because I miss my daughter. Because I see now what we almost destroyed with our arrogance. Because Jackson is the best thing that ever happened to Amanda, and you are the reason he is the man he is today." We talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon. She shared her fears about her daughter marrying someone from a different background, her misguided belief that she was protecting Amanda's future. I shared stories of raising Jackson, the challenges and joys of being a single parent. By the time she left, something had shifted between us. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect that had been entirely absent before. The next Sunday, Amanda's parents joined us for dinner. It was awkward at first, with Mr. Thornton clearly uncomfortable in my small apartment. But as the evening progressed, the tension gradually eased. When Jackson shared the news that Amanda was pregnant with their first child, the shared joy of impending grandparenthood created a bridge neither family could have built alone. Over time, our two families found a cautious balance. The Thorntons never fully embraced my world, nor did I entirely trust theirs. But we established a relationship based on the one thing we had in common: love for Jackson and Amanda. When their daughter Emma was born a year later, I found myself sharing grandparent duties with the same people who had once tried to exclude me from my son life. Today, 3 years after that painful wedding day, I look at my expanded family with a sense of wonder. Jackson teaches full-time at the community college, inspiring students who remind him of the young man I once was. Amanda runs a nonprofit that provides educational resources to underprivileged children, inspired partly by the stories of my struggles to support Jackson education. Little Emma now, a toddler with Jackson curious eyes, and Amanda determination, splits her time between two very different grandparent households, learning valuable lessons from both. The nameplate incident, as we now sometimes call it, taught me profound lessons about family identity and self-worth. I learned that true dignity comes not from defending your pride, but from standing firmly in your truth. I discovered that the bonds formed through years of sacrifice and love cannot be broken by a single act of cruelty, no matter how deliberate. And I realized that forgiveness, while difficult, creates space for healing that bitterness never allows. Most importantly, I came to understand that being a parent is not about the status you provide or the advantages you secure. It is about the values you instill, the unconditional love you offer, and the example you set through your own life. No nameplate, regardless of what it says, can define the relationship between a father and the child he has raised with his whole heart. As I watched Jackson teaching Emma how to bait a fishing hook using the same patient instructions I once gave him, I feel a completion of a circle. The struggles were worth it. The sacrifices led to this moment. And though my path as a father was harder than some, I would not trade it for any other. What defines a real father? Is it education, wealth, or social standing? Or is it showing up every day, providing not just for physical needs but emotional ones as well? I believe true parenthood is measured by presence, not presence, by lessons. Taught through living, not lectures delivered from a distance. If my story resonates with you, I would love to hear about your own family experiences in the comments below. Have you ever faced judgment based on your background or education? How did you handle it? Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family bonds that survive despite challenges. Share this video with someone who has stood by you when others tried to push you aside. Thank you for listening, and remember, the family that matters most is the one that loves you for exactly who you are, not who they want you to be.